Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. We'll let folks in just a few. While we're waiting for others to join us, please put in the chat where you're visiting from, where in Arizona. Do we have people from Northern Arizona, Southern, or in Central Phoenix? Please let us know where you're joining from. We are excited to have our Immigration 101 webinar for business owners and AZHCC members. My name is Beth Banda. I'm the Director of Events for your Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we're so excited to have two special guests today that will really dig into the details of what we need to know to feel confident moving forward with our businesses, knowing our rights. And we have Sal Macias, who is an attorney, and he's going to talk about some of those rights that we have as business owners. And Michelle Gray, who is joining us. She's an HR expert. We'll hear from her in just a moment. But again, please, if you have any questions, you can start throwing those in the chat now. And also let us know where you're joining from. Glendale, East Valley. We'd love to engage with you. And we'll start in a few more moments. All right, I think we're good to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here. Again, my name is Beth Banda, Events Director for your Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We're so excited today to be able to present this Immigration 101 webinar for you, for business owners and members. We're excited to have Sal Macias, attorney, and Michelle Gray, she's an HR expert today to really dig into what our rights are as business owners and other important information. We know that we are in uncertain times currently with the administration. So there's a lot of new information that is coming out. It changes, as we were previously talking about. It changes constantly. So we want to be able to provide you with the information that we have today. We're going to get started with Michelle Gray. I'll read her bio. Michelle Gray is the founder and client consultant of Integra HR Consulting, focusing on her professional experience in the human resource field. She has dedicated herself to HR for nearly 2 decades. So she has plenty of experience to share with us today, and we're excited. Her involvement in the community, coupled with her experience, has provided her opportunities to speak at various association events, as well as training engagements for various businesses and industries. She's an active member of the Society for Human Resources Management and has held positions in the local Arizona SHRM associations to include President, SMA of Greater Phoenix, Diversity and Inclusion Director of SHRM of Greater Phoenix, and SHRM State Council, past director, Director, Diversity Leadership Alliance, DLA, Awards Committee member, and board member. Michelle currently holds the SHRMCP certification and Professional Human Resources Certification, PHR, certified PDP administrator, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Business Management. Michelle, it's such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Definitely excited to be here today. And so, what I wanted to do is just before we go into what is it you need to know as a business owner, or you're getting ready to become a business owner, and kind of knowing how do we navigate the times today and change as well. And so, just a little bit of background, as Beth said, a little bit about my bio. But really, what you want to know is, okay, we're talking to an HR. Some people might not have had always the best experience with HR, right? So I want to say I'm there to be your resource, right? Always know that there are some phenomenal HR experts out there. HR should really be a collaborator and someone that is working with the organization, with the employees, and with the community. It's all about how do we continue to move our businesses forward and how do we treat people with dignity. And of course, the topic today being on immigration, it's all about who we are. We are human, we are people, and how do we respect one another? And it all goes down to dignity. So the things I wanted to cover today really focus on the parts of HR is, there's the compliance and laws. Sal will touch more on that legal side, but I want to give you a little bit of overview as how does this impact and what do I do and how do I prepare, right? How do I make sure that I'm proactive versus reactive? So I'm gonna, Beth, are you able to pull up the PowerPoint presentation so I can at least have people follow along?
Yes, we'll get that pulled up for you right
Okay,
now.
beautiful. So as they're doing that, one of the things that I want to say is first thing, if you currently have employees or you're thinking about having employees, look at the documentation. A lot of times we don't think about our files. How do we have them? What do they look like? We have an employee, we have 5 employees, we have 10, we have 100, whatever the number is. Are my files one? Are they accurate? Are they secure? Where am I putting them? So it's looking at the employee files. I don't know. A lot of times, just recently, I actually did an audit for an organization that was over 50 employees, and they had been in business and they're currently in business over 10 years. And one of the things that when I went in, they're like, oh, I thought we can keep everything lumped together. So they were not aware that their documentation actually should be separated. So showing best practices is how do you separate them? And I'll explain a little bit more here in a little bit of why you want to have your files accurate, your documents separated, because how it impacts if you did have an audit, ensuring not everything is shown to any agency and too much information that they don't need. Um, so when you have an employee, what's really important that also helps, especially if ICE or immigration or any one of the departments were to come in, what you want to be looking at is when you start, you have an employee, the very first thing after you hire someone is to do the I-9. And in the example I gave you, working with a client, they did their I-9s, but they didn't know they did I-9s, they did the E-Verify, but they didn't realize that, oh, if my E-Verify comes back and it was a a non-tentative, what am I supposed to do with it? So what was happening is they were sitting with many documents of either the I-9 not finished or complete or missing information, or the E-Verify not processed accurately. So very important to know is that you want to have your I-9s done within 3 business days. So what happens is you get those. That is one, and I have to say, one of the savings grace is making sure your I-9s are done, that they're done in a timely manner. So if they're not, that's okay. Go back, do an audit of your I-9s. So you kind of want to look at the very beginning. All your active employees, because that's the first thing you want to do. Look at all your active employees. Has an I-9 been done? If it's not, or information's missing, maybe somebody forgot to put their date of birth on there, or their social, or they didn't sign it. Look at that, because what happens is not just in an immigration situation or an ICE comes in, they're also looking at is there opportunities when if they were to come in an agency and they're looking at the I-9s, there's different fines that can happen for every mistake that occurs, or if you're not doing your E-Verify. So it's a very critical piece of the beginning part when you hire an employee. Um, I-9s can be done, hard copy, and they can also be done electronically. So just making sure you're consistent. The other thing with I-9s is to make sure that if you are keeping copies, you're consistent that you're doing them all copies, the ID that they provide you. If you don't keep copies, you don't keep copies for any of them, but you do have to keep a copy for the E-Verify with, like, for example, a passport. Those you do have to keep a copy of, and it's for the purpose of E-Verify. But if somebody's providing you like a driver's license and a social security card, for example, and you're like, I don't want to keep copies, you can destroy those. You just want to make sure that all of them are destroyed. You don't keep for some and not for others, because then you're differentiated, and that could be another department that looked at is, are you discriminating, right? So there's a lot of things that can occur. So what happens, with a confirmation versus a non-confirmation? This is the area that's really important. When you process the I-9 and then you go through the E-Verify, if you get a tentative non-confirmation, make sure that you're not having any adverse action on an employee. You have 10 days as an employer to make sure you get that information, letting the employee that they got a tentative. Then they have eight business days from when you provide that letter to them from the E-Verify. It tells them go to be able to go down to, to look at their social security, what information's missing. And then you wait until that time. You have to check your E-Verify system to see if it's been cleared. So never make an assumption that if a non-tentative comes back, then an employee is potentially not legal to work in the US, because many times that's not the case. It could be a name, something wrong on their social, and a lot of times it comes back correct. But they do have up to 8 days, unless they say they're not going to contest it, then of course, or it's past that, then you would let them go. That part is the area that I always get asked, well, do they still have to work? Yes, they are still working during the time that they're going and getting that corrected. So make sure you're not letting people go if that comes back, because that could be adverse action. So you want to make sure that you're following that area around I-9s and E-Verify. That is one of the biggest areas that helps protect you as an organization, to show that you're doing and you're following the law, right? So there's the law, and then there's business practices. So the next area you see, this is the area that I have seen in my 20 plus years in HR, the knowing and willingly. So as a business owner, including myself, right, is to ensure that if you're aware, and it's the knowing and willingly that the law looks at too. If you know or you willingly hire someone that is not legal to work, this is where, as a business owner, you could get in trouble. It could impact your business, and it could actually legally impact you as a business owner. Now, just because there could be people, there's assumption, there's the grapevine, right? There's the gossip that happens. It's really important to ensure that you're not listening to that. That's why you follow process. That's why you do your I-9s. That's why you get applications as much as possible, because the employee is signing that the information is true and accurate. These are things that help prepare your company, that keeps you to show, hey, we are following the law, and we're treating our employees equally, and we're treating them with dignity and respect. We're not making assumptions on anything. So always make sure that, one, you're not knowing and willingly. I can tell you myself, I have had very rare, but it's happened. I've worked with, I've had potential clients where, unfortunately, a couple of the business owners actually knowingly and willingly and asked me, hey, we know these individuals actually are not legal to work in the United States. Is it okay? What do? We want to still hire them. Now myself, because now I'm aware, I'm not able to work with that client, because then it puts me as the HR professional that I knowingly and willingly am aware that this employer is hiring, right? But we go into the part is, well, what do I do? I follow the process. I treat my employees with dignity and respect, right? I'm making sure we're processing things, they come back. There's no, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But when it comes to culture and perception, what do people say about the business? So I know several years ago when I worked in for a construction company, and it was I call it the grapevine conversations, right? Many people, it was this perception. Oh yes, this family and everybody works with them. We know that, they're not legal to work. I used to hear that, and I said, well, that's just your perception and what you think and what you hear. You want to make sure you stop that you're ensuring that that type of culture, that type of perception or conversations are not happening in the workplace. Stop it right away. Say, look, we hire according to the law, and we want to treat people, again, with the right respect. We're here to do a job, and everybody's treated the same. Just because you hear that someone may or may not be, that's a perception. That is false information. And again, it's not their business to know, but it's important for the employer to ensure that they're just following the right thing. In those situations that I've happened, it was just people that were saying that because they were making assumptions because, certain family groups would come and it was word of mouth. They loved the organization, so they would tell people. It didn't mean anything that that they didn't have the documents or right documents to be able to work in the United States. So we want to ensure that there's not this perception of that. Because not only that, um, what says that someone is not a US citizen either, right? So it's keeping out that part of making assumption that someone is, oh, they're not from here. We cannot do that. And we don't want to have that perception or that culture in any part of our organization. So always setting a foundation about what your business is like and what people talk about the business. Because not only that, that also gets out into the community. So ensuring that you're following that. That goes into like when you talk about confidentiality. This has been asked even throughout my time in HRs where, employees might say, well, do I have to disclose to people? What if my manager asks me or another employer, they're making comments like, oh, are you an employee? Are you following? Are you here legally? Are you a contractor, right? Does that apply to me? Do I have to tell people? Do I have to tell people my status? No. It's a need to know basis, meaning it's between you and your employer, meaning whether it's an HR person, it's the owner of the business, it's the one that you're doing your documents and your paperwork with, right? So your files, for example, employees' files should never be shared with managers or anybody outside that need to know, meaning keeping them confidential. The only information managers would need was like, hey, is the employee performing? But they don't need to have information if they're married, how many kids they have, what's their taxes like, what's their immigration, what's their age. They should not have any of that information. Again, keeping stuff confidential. That is always important because I see that happen where an employee might be a little nervous and they feel that they have to divulge that to other people, or if they feel intimidated by their manager. So ensure that, keeping that open communications where employees feel that they can come to you or they have a resource to talk to should they feel like they are being impacted by false information or treated unfairly or disrespectfully. So ensuring you have not only that, talking about culture again, that you have a culture of an open door, right? Employees know that they can come to you and that you have integrity, that you're going to treat people and that you're going to listen to them, that you're not going to ignore the concerns that they have, especially when it comes to things with immigration, with what's going on today. Just because one person might not see things happening to them doesn't mean that they're not impacted by them because their situation could be completely different. A lot of times you want to build a culture too, where in the outside, they might have family things happening. Watch your employees' behaviors. Is there a change in them? Do they seem like they're afraid or they're scared or something could be, going on? Making sure you're talking to your employees so you can see, hey, is there something I can help you with? Is there something occurring? Because all those things lead to what other people say about the business. And then what people say or how people represent the organization has impact on agencies hearing, right? And where I say that is they can go and tell an agency or somebody feels, I wasn't treated fairly or I was discriminated against and file a complaint. And I'll tell you today, agencies talk to each other. It's not like, okay, ICE comes in or I have, the Department of Homeland Security, they're looking at my files, they want to see my I-9s. If they discover things, let's say that all your files are together, and in there, they see wage information, right? They have things on somebody making under minimum wage, which they shouldn't. Let's just say they see stuff on there. They could easily then provide information over to the Department of Labor. So you want to be careful that you are keeping one, as I mentioned earlier, your documents are separate, but that's part of the reason why you're keeping them separate. But number two, that employees know that their information is held confidential. Um, so another thing, so what do I do? Is there a risk when it comes to, as I mentioned, the difference where employee says, do I have to disclose if I'm an employee from a contractor? For example, I have a couple of contractors that work with me. They have their own business, they do their own stuff, but they're HR experts. So I use them for projects, for example, in the specialty areas that they really focus on. So I make sure that they're not treated like an employee. So you always want to make sure your independent contractors, your 1099, are not treated like an employee. That's one. Number two is, do I have a risk? So hiring a 1099 does not remove you as a business owner from risk. Because if you, again, going back to knowingly and willingly, if you were to hire someone, you're using them as a 1099, and you knowingly and willingly are using them, but they're a 1099, does not put you out of, oh, I'm not going to have any risk for myself or my business because they're technically not an employee. That's not true. So making sure that again, you're not e-verifying them, you're not doing an I-9, they're an independent contractor. They have other opportunities to have other clients, other businesses. They should be able to be free of being able to make other money than just the organization you support, but making sure that, again, if you know or aware, you do not want to, you want to tread on that very lightly because you don't want to knowingly and willingly, think that that's going to remove any risk from you. So what happens if an agency were to come in? I know that Sal probably took a little bit more on there, what to do in the do's and don'ts, but these are just some of the things that are really important if you were to have an agency like ICE come in, right? Don't be afraid, because one of the things, we don't want to panic, right? You want to ask if they have a warrant to come in, that's a little bit different. Always make sure whoever comes, ask for the credentials. If they're saying they have a warrant, make sure you have that warrant, that they show you the warrant. Again, don't stop them from coming in if there is a warrant. That's very different if somebody's coming in, there's a raid or something like that. But the first thing, identify, as I mentioned, be proactive. Identify who would be the person right away that you would get in the company, and then making sure you have legal counsel on your phone to call, because you want to make sure your legal counsel is part of that, because they're going to help walk you through. They can get on the phone with the agent that's coming there, and that's if it's a warrant. Now, you can also get things where someone comes in, they're like, we need to pull all your files. We're with the Department of Labor, we're with ICE, we need to see all your I-9s. This goes back to why you want your documents separate. So you want to make sure that you're going through each of those, that they're separate, but ask them for, again, ask for the agent's information, ask for the subpoena file, what they need to see, contact your attorney so you can show them, make sure they say how many days you have to get that, and then make sure you set up a time. Follow up with that agency. Okay, we can set this time up, this date, to come and look at them. A lot of times, if you are working with them, you're respectful, a lot of times they'll work with you, right? So you don't want to show any fear, and you never provide more information than they need to know. I've seen that in audits. I've seen that where an agency comes and the manager or somebody doing, whoever's doing that, provides them more than they need. And again, you don't want agencies providing another agency, because it puts your company at more risk or more potential for fines that you don't want to be part of. So how do I protect my employees? Again, it goes back to, if my employees are fear, you're hearing through the grapevine, you're seeing people not coming into work because they think, oh, something's going to happen. Again, reassuring your employees that they're in a good working environment. You follow the law, you follow everything. They should not be afraid. Making sure you're keeping that open door with them. So the last thing, what are some things and tools that you can look at? So as I mentioned, your I-9s, your documents. If you don't, and I know that sometimes it can be costly, but you'd be amazed. There's a lot of organizations out there, what I call it's called an HRIS system, which is the Human Resource Information System. So these are things like payroll systems that you can actually do everything from your onboarding to your I-9s to your E-Verify. It could do your handbooks, all of these types of things that help keep all your documents stored in one location, but they can be done separately. It also alarms you, like, did I do my I-9 within the 3 days of my E-Verify? I love some of these awesome payroll system. I know one that I work with real close because the system's really easy. It's an iSolve software through Greenleaf. That's an example of one, but there's a whole lot out there these are things sometimes we think, oh, we're too small, we can't afford it. You'd be amazed what some of these systems do, and you can pick and choose what you want. Can they track your payroll, time off? So a lot of laws in Arizona now, especially that you got to track things. So why do I say this, and how does that relate to like immigration? Because all these things is helps prevent you to show you're being proactive and following the law and doing the right things as a business owner. It protects your employees, it protects things from being opened up to other stuff. If you can go on to the next slide. So as you're thinking about, so if again, don't know, I know some of you again might be new business owners looking to start, or you have employees, kind of things you want to look at. How many employees do I currently have? Why do you want to look at that? Reason why you want to look at that is because you want to know what laws apply to you. When I mentioned earlier about, immigration, there are also things that relate to immigration internally. Even if you're like, hey, you know what? I'm safe in my industry. No, nobody's safe anymore. We want to make sure we're always doing an audit, making sure we're treating employees, that we're not discriminating. Because again, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Labor, which is, wage and hour. We've got the Industrial Commission, which handles the Arizona paid sick leave law. So we have all these different agencies that one, they talk or work with each other. We want to make sure we're not violating, that we're not retaliating to employees, we're not disrespecting employees, and we're not making an assumption that someone is illegal or allowing employees or customers or vendors to treat employees wrong. Have employees know that they do have rights and they can come to that. So making sure you have policies and procedures so employees know that they who to go to if they're treated wrong, that they don't feel like I can't go to my employer because they're not going to believe me. The customer comes first. No, hopefully integrity in your business is number one priority, to where you listen to your employees before an assumption is made by an outside. I saw that happen just recently, where a person was on a phone call customer service, and the customer was telling the agent that they wanted to talk to someone that was from the United States. And the person said, I am. No, I wanted to speak to somebody who's an American. And the person's like, what do you mean? And the person literally told this agent that they sounded that they were Hispanic. And the agent asked them, what made me sound like that? I am from here. And regardless of the rhyme or reason, they needed to let their employer know. It's all about, what did their employer do? Did they make the employee feel comfortable to know, hey, look, we're going to make sure that this is handled. We'll treat you with respect, because it goes back to, how do you treat your employees? So reiterating, the other things to, again, going forward, if you haven't done one recently or it's been a while, do an I-9 audit. I am hearing that across the board, multiple attorneys, multiple conferences I've attended with, especially within the past 3 to 4 months. Audit your I-9s. Take a look at them. Is everything on there? Am I missing information? Document on a file that you made the corrections. Make sure that you say, hey, I did an audit on this day. That's a really good saving grace for an organization should you have an I-9 audit, because they're looking for that. Also, again, fear versus calm. Make sure you stay calm in any situation. Look at what the agencies are doing today. As I mentioned, the agency talk to each other, but that doesn't mean that, hey, one's going to tell the other, right? It means, hey, I'm not afraid because I have all my files correct. If they needed to talk to employees, my employees are going to say, no, the company hires legally, they follow the guidelines, they follow the law, they do their documents the way they're supposed to. They treat us with respect. So again, they could easily ask questions and interview people. So that goes back to things about culture and the perception that's out there about your organization. Um, and with that, I think a lot of things, I know when we talk about the immigration, how I just kind of want to sum it up as, if you're looking at things and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of information. What do I do? Take it step by step. I can be there as a resource. Feel free to call me, ask me. I love when I get business owners that just have a question to ask us. Where do I start? How do I look at things? I've got 5 employees. What laws do I have to follow? Always there for that if you guys need that. And hopefully the information again goes a lot back to be proactive, look at your files, make sure you do a 9 audit, and then, really have an attorney should you think that there could be a potential that you were to have, ICE or someone come in, just being prepared and the right people are in the right places. All right. Well, thank you.
Microphone.
There we go.
Thank you, Michelle. Wow, that was a great information that I think we all needed. We'll go ahead and put the links to those resources that you listed on that last slide. We'll put those
Okay,
in the
perfect.
chat. And we have time, about 5 minutes for some
Sure.
questions. If you have questions, you can add that into the chat or in the Q&A box. We'll give folks a few moments so then we can uh, get your questions answered by Michelle, and she is going to head out in just a bit, and we'll get Sal on board. Any questions for Michelle? All righty. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being
Thank
here.
you.
We appreciate
Appreciate
your
it.
time, and we look forward to more of this in the future. If you
Thank
were
you.
just joining us, I know that we've had several folks log on. We are so excited to have Michelle Gray, who just presented from an HR perspective, Immigration 101 for business owners and members. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Sal Macias. Let me go ahead and spotlight him. Sal Macias is a criminal defense and immigration lawyer at the Nunez Law Firm, born in Aguascalientes, Mexico, and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. He graduated from Arizona State University with a BA in political science and BA in transborder Chicana, Latino, Latina studies, a minor in Spanish, and obtained his Juris Doctor. Being a DACA recipient himself, provides Salvador with a unique and personal perspective on immigration law. Sal, thank you so much for joining us today, and you can take it away.
Yeah. Share my see the part. Yeah. Yes. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Salvador Macias. I'm currently an immigration and criminal attorney. I have my own law firm, Macias Law, but I do most of my work through Nunez Law Firm. And I'm also currently the civil rights chair for the Los Abogados committee. A little bit about me, yeah, as you heard, the reason that I do this work is because I'm a DACA recipient, and I want to talk a little bit about what DACA is. So DACA is an acronym for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was established through executive order during the Obama administration in 2012. It has helped around 800,000 young people, often referred to as dreamers. Now, not all dreamers are DACA recipients, but all DACA recipients are dreamers, and the reason for that is there were specific parameters outlined with DACA, and there are other children that were brought to the United States undocumentedly that do not qualify for the DACA program, but also identify as dreamers. But for something, for what I would want you to understand is it does not grant an official legal status or a pathway to citizenship. A lot of people will ask, well, why don't you just apply? And we'll delve a little bit into the weeds as to what makes that difficult. But it does allow them to have driver's license, social security numbers, and work permits. Also, it allows DACA recipients to apply for something called advanced parole, which is a type of permit that allows you to leave the country for specific reasons, whether that's for work purposes, education purposes, or humanitarian purposes. However, right now, under this current administration, a lot of people seem to be holding back from applying for this specific permit. So, I first wanted to talk about the visa green card eligibility categories. So, some of the things that I hear all the time is, why don't you just get in line? And the fact of the matter is that there is no line. Now, there's not a line for everyone. Some people don't have a route to lawful immigration status. And the four main ways that people can apply are either through family members of United States citizens or lawful permanent residents, either through a painful past, such as asylum, crime victims, victims of human trafficking and domestic violence, highly skilled workers and business investors in that sector. I will be honest, I don't do many um, work immigration processes. And there's also the worldwide visa lottery, which is it's a lottery process that applies to most of the world, but not to countries such as Mexico, where the immigration is already high coming from that specific country. So there are different entry bars. This is the first moment where I want to show you, and I have sorry about that. I have a whiteboard behind me that I would like to show. So, and I apologize. I know there's a little bit of a glare here, but I think this is the easiest way to see the different bars. Let's pretend this line is the U.S. border. Okay, if someone enters the country with a visa or undocumented, whatever it may be, if that visa permit expires and they start living in the country more than 1 year without status, if this person ever leaves the country, either through their own decision or because they've been deported, they automatically trigger a 10-year bar. So simply living in the United States for more than 1 year without status, if you leave the country, you trigger a 10-year bar. Now, there is a waiver for that bar, but the only people that can give you that waiver is a U.S. citizen or resident spouse or a U.S. citizen or resident parent. Okay? Now, what most people don't realize is if they decide to come back again after having left the country and having this bar, it actually converts to a different bar. It's called the permanent bar. Now, the permanent bar, there is a way to remove it, but the only way you remove it is by living 10 years abroad and then asking for a waiver. So most people don't realize that. A lot of you may have you may know individuals who maybe entered in 2000 and they've been here for 4 years. Unfortunately, one of their parents passes away and they decide to leave the country to go to the funeral because they got sick. And then they re-enter illegally. they triggered a permanent bar. It doesn't matter if they marry a U.S. citizen. It doesn't matter if they've been here for 30 more years. It doesn't matter that they're business owners. It doesn't matter that they have children, grandchildren that are U.S. citizens. If they have the permanent bar, they have to leave the country for 10 years and then ask for a waiver. So those rules and procedures got actually established in the law passed in 1996, but they started implementing them in 1997. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint for now. So one of the ways that people can fix, as I mentioned, is through family members. There are certain family members that are considered immediate relatives. Immediate relatives are a spouse, a child who's under the age of 21, or parents. Beyond that, though, there are other categories. For example, the F1 is unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens that are older than 21. Their spouses and children of permanent residents. Their unmarried sons and daughters over age of 21 for permanent residents, married sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, etc. What people don't realize is that these visas here, they only allocate a certain number per year, which means that there is a time frame that continues and continues to expand. So, for example, in a situation where my brother is a U.S. citizen, so my brother could actually petition for me if he wanted to. The first hurdle that we would have to wait for is I would fall under that F4 visa category. The current wait times for that for an F4, and I'm from Mexico, is they're barely processing the paperwork from March 1st, 2001. So the back of the line for adjusting through my brother, we're talking about a quarter century. And that's what makes it really difficult for people to want to move forward with any sort of application. Not to mention that since I don't have current status, I would have to go to Mexico for my interview. And as mentioned, if I've lived here more than 1 year without status, if I leave, it triggers a 10-year bar. So not only would I have to wait the 25 years for my brother to be able to give me a visa, but now I have to wait an additional 10 years to be able to ask for that, to get rid of that bar. It just makes it unrealistic. So let's do some examples. I'll go back to the board just because I think that is an easier way to showcase it. So let's go back to this board. So let's hypothetically say I enter the United States and I entered in 1995. And I've lived here ever since. I've never left the country. I've lived here undocumented, and then I decide to marry a U.S. citizen. So I get married. My spouse would be able to file first an application that's called an I-130. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. So this is the border. I entered in 1995. I've been living here without status. Got married to a United States citizen. My spouse would be able to file something that's called an I-130. That is an application that basically says, I'm a US citizen, he is my spouse, I'm asking for him to get his status. So we know that that will be approved. Currently, that's taking around 2 years to process. Now, once that gets passed, approved, they actually send you a notice saying, yep, now you have to go to Juarez for your interview. But what they don't tell you is that the moment that you leave, remember what I said in that initial drawing? If you answered, you live more than 1 year without status, the moment you leave, you trigger a 10-year bar. So before I leave, my spouse can file an I-601A. So that's el perdón, the waiver. It waives my having lived here unlawfully. So when this is approved, which is currently taking around 3 years, when I leave and I trigger this bar, it's actually already forgiven. And then I can be in Juarez. For Juarez, they ask me all the other questions that might make me inadmissible. For example, you may have heard through contacts or friends, hey, I heard someone that went to Juarez for their interview. They already had their waiver, but now they're stuck there for whatever other reason, or they denied them for a different reason and they thought they were okay because they had the waiver. This waiver only forgives the unlawful presence. But let's say that when I crossed, uh, I brought a child with me undocumented. That's technically a trafficking charge. And there is a waiver for that if that was your son, daughter, or spouse. But I can only apply for that waiver outside of the country, not before I left, which is why you hear, and this is also going to take around 2 to 3 years. It's why sometimes you hear of people that leave and get stuck, either because they didn't apply for this first waiver to forgive the 10 years, or because there was another issue at their interview and now they need another waiver. Okay? This process is known as counselor process. As you can see, it's lengthy, and I estimate it takes roughly 6 to 7 years, and that's doing everything right. Now, you may have heard of other people that, hey, well, I heard someone who married somebody and they didn't go to Juarez, they did it here in Phoenix, and it was a lot faster. And you would be correct. That process is different. As mentioned, this is called counselor processing. The process that they're referring to is called an adjustment of status. So, what's the difference between those two processes and why is one better than the other? Well, yeah. I think it was probably just they had a little bit more liquid there still. So that's called an adjustment of status. Okay. How can one qualify for an adjustment of status? Well, let's say hypothetically, I still entered in 1995, but instead of having entered without inspection or illegally, I entered with a visa. And my family just decided to overstay. And I've been living here without status for many years. Okay. I also marry my spouse, who's a US citizen. The advantage of doing an adjustment of status is that these forms that I described, the I-130, instead of that being sent for a potential interview in Juarez, it actually gets sent to have their interview in Phoenix. And I'm eligible for that because I had a legal entry, even if I'm now without status. And since the interview is in Phoenix, I don't have to ask for that waiver because the waiver only becomes an issue when the bar triggers. The bar triggers when you leave the country. So if I don't leave the country, I don't need the waiver. I could just fix in Phoenix. And that process right now is taking roughly 6 to 9 months. A lot easier, a lot faster of a process. Now, is it only visa holders who qualify for this? And the answer would be no. It's technically anybody that had a legal inspection or admission at a port of entry. So, me, let's say I entered without a visa, which is accurate, it's what actually occurred. I actually got my DACA status and submitted for advanced parole, which is that permit to be able to leave the country for specific reasons. 2 years ago, I actually left and was able to be let back in through advanced parole. So now I have a legal entry, which would open the door for an adjustment of status. If my spouse was a U.S. citizen or resident, a U.S. citizen, or if I had U.S. citizen children who were over 21. Unfortunately, my wife is also a DACA recipient, and my children, my oldest is 7 years old. So I'm still at least 14 years away from me being able to do this process. Other people that qualify for this are if you have a family member, and by family member, I mean spouse, parent, or child who's in the military. Okay. If they're in the military, you can request something that's called uh, parole in place. Okay. What it means is you submit paperwork demonstrating the relationship. You also demonstrate that they are in the military, and you submit an application saying, government, because of the sacrifice that my family member is doing, I'm asking you to give me parole in place. What that does that mean? Let me enter legally, magically, from not without having to do anything. Once that's granted, they now have been paroled legally into the country, which is, counts as a legal entry. And now that opens the door for them to do an adjustment of status. Now, many of you, well, if you're on this call, you are either a business owner or maybe considering to open your own business. And one of the main questions that I get all the time is, look, I know these individuals, they're great. I'd love to be able to help them. I heard that I can petition them. I've heard that employers can petition for their employees. Is that something that I can do? How much would it cost? And they get ahead of it. They get ahead of themselves a little bit. Um, the biggest issue with an adjustment of status is the reason that people that now are unlawfully present in the country can fix through an immediate relative is it doesn't require them having legal status to do an adjustment of status when it's a family member. But when it's an employer, they do need to have current legal status. So with family member, current legal status does not matter, just the legal entry. But if you're an employer, they do need current legal status, which means that to do an adjustment of status, they wouldn't be able to qualify for that. Because if you're trying to get them their green card, chances are that they currently don't have one. They don't have current status. When they don't have current legal status, their only remedy is for them to do consular processing, as we had mentioned before. So, consular processing. So I entered 95. I have no status. My employer wants to petition for me. So they could file a form two called an I-140, which as you can see is very similar to the I-130. The difference here is that you're saying, I'm a company, I'm an employer, I'm petitioning my employee. And you're right, that will be approved. The downside is they're going to say, okay, now go to Juarez to finish the interview. But remember what I said. Anyone who's accrued more than 1 year of unlawful status, when they leave, they will trigger a 10-year bar. Okay? Which means unless they have a U.S. citizen or resident spouse or U.S. citizen or resident parent, they will not qualify for the waiver. Meaning that your employee is now stuck at the consulate abroad. Those are the biggest hurdles where it comes to an employer trying to petition an individual. Because for most families, not in all cases, but in most families, the first family member to have status is typically the child and not the parent or grandparent. So, yeah, no worries. So I'll go back to sharing the PowerPoint. So, as mentioned, there are also visas for victims of abuse, or some that have had painful past. The first one is called VAWA. That is an application for it represents Violence Against Women's Act. But I want to be clear, it doesn't only benefit women, it can also benefit men. And in order to qualify for VAWA, they have to be an abused spouse of a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, the abused child of a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, or the abused parent of a U.S. United States citizen. A T visa is for those that have been trafficked, and a U visa is one that you may have heard a little bit more. There are certain crimes that qualify for a U visa. In order to qualify for it, you need to be a victim of these specific crimes. Some of the ones that are more common are domestic violence. If you've ever been mugged at gunpoint or with a weapon, in Arizona, it's called an aggravated assault. Um, for the purposes of immigration, they actually refer to it as a felonious assault. And on top of being the victim, in the police report that gets done, you need to be able to at least let them know that you're willing to aid in the investigation. To qualify for the U visa, first you have to get a certification from law enforcement, and then the packet goes to immigration. It's a great program because remember how I mentioned that permanent bar? Um, well, a U visa is actually one of the few things that actually gets rid of that permanent bar without having to live outside the country for 10 years. So it's a great, great opportunity, especially for those people that have a lot of criminal history, a lot of immigration history. Maybe they've been deported in the past. A U visa can overcome a lot of those obstacles. The downside with a U visa is, like as I mentioned with the others, there are only a certain number of visas that can give out a year. So right now, if someone were to apply now, I would assume that it would take at least 10 years before they can get their U visa. After receiving their U visa, they'd be able to apply. After 3 years, they'd be able to apply for their green card. And then 5 years after that, they could apply for their citizenship. Now, one of the things that past administration was doing, and it's still happening, is while they're waiting for that U visa that I mentioned is taking near a decade, they're giving them work permits, which is great. As you know, having a work permit in Arizona gives you a social security number, gives you access to get a driver's license, and makes you employable. So that is a great option. Now, the other basis for um, relief is called asylum. So you may have heard of asylum. It's what's currently most in the news. What people don't realize is that to apply for asylum, you have to do it within 1 year of entering the country or 1 year of changed circumstances. That the things have changed now as to why you fear going back to your country. And it can't just be, well, I wasn't in deportation proceedings before and now I am, so now I'm scared now. That won't fly. Now, it isn't just having fear of going back to your country. That fear has to be based on persecution. That means that they're chasing you, that they want to attack you, that they're looking for you or people like you. And this persecution had to have been in the past or persecution that could happen in the future. Now, people say, okay, that's something that I am afraid. I am afraid that they're going to attack me. But it's not just getting attacked. It has to be on the basis of one of these five things: race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or because you're part of a particular social group. And for most people fleeing, at least Latin America, they're not necessarily being attacked for being Latino. They're not being attacked because they're Mexican, Colombian, or Salvadorian. Oftentimes, they're not being attacked for their religion either. Maybe a little bit on the political opinion. Some cases, some countries can make that argument, but the vast majority of asylum applications I see is particular social group. And a lot of people ask, well, what does that mean? It means that either you belong to a group or society believes that you belong to a group that is socially distinct from the general public. Like some people can point it out. The best way I can describe it to somebody, think of someone that identifies in the LGBTQ or as a homosexual. Even if they're not, if the community sees that individual as a homosexual and they're being attacked for being part of or being assumed to be a part of that group, that is just a quick example. Now, beyond that, you have to show that the government of your home country cannot or will not protect you, and that if even if that's the case, that there's nowhere in the country that you could go. So, for example, a lot of people from Mexico claim, well, los carteles, the drug cartels that they're attacking us, etc. Well, the United States government does not like to assume that the Mexican government cannot protect you. They oftentimes will say, "Oh, well, that sounds like a local crime issue that your country needs to figure out." Beyond that, let's say that these attacks are happening in, I don't know, let's say Sinaloa for the sake of the argument. One of the things that they'll try to argue is, okay, well, why not go to Guadalajara? Why not go to Puebla? Why not go to La Ciudad de Mexico? So that's what makes these types of cases so difficult to win. There are two other processes called withholding of removal and the protection under the Convention Against Torture. Those are what I call like the brother and sister of asylum. For those, you don't have to have applied within the 1 year, but it's a higher burden to prove. So if you thought asylum was difficult to prove, withholding and convention against torture are even higher of difficulty. And the downside with withholding of removal and the protection under CAT is that it doesn't grant you a lawful permanent resident status. It just basically means that they won't deport you. And under this administration, they've implemented the remain in Mexico policy. So that's under the Biden administration. People could try to come across the border if they got caught, or if they surrender to the border, they could say, "Hey, I have a fear of persecution. I want to fight my case." The Biden administration would then decide to either detain them and let them fight it, or they'll say, "Okay, we're gonna let you fight it. Go to these hearings, and eventually you're gonna have your hearing before an immigration judge." In the meantime, though, you can go to this family member or that family member. Um, Now the policy has shifted. They're saying that if you want to apply for asylum, even if you claim it by crossing the border illegally, they're gonna take you back to Mexico and make you wait there until the possibility of arguing the asylum. This might work for countries that are not Mexico. Like if you're from El Salvador and you're fleeing in El Salvador to be able to claim asylum, well, being in Mexico is not the worst situation because you're fleeing El Salvador, not Mexico. But my argument to the Remain in Mexico policy is, what if you're someone fleeing Mexico and now they're forcing you to stay in the place where there is persecution? So I'm sure that there will be legal challenges on that. As far as detention, what happens if you are detained? Typically, it happens through a traffic stop or local law enforcement. But as you've seen, they're starting to up ICE raids as well as ICE approaching homes. So if you are picked up, you typically have an initial appearance. If it's a criminal matter, you'll have an initial appearance before a criminal judge, where they'll likely release you on bond or on your own recognizance. But people think, oh, if I pay the bond, they're gonna let me out of Fourth Avenue jail and I'll be okay. No, if you pay the bond and you have no status, it is very likely that ICE will hold you and then transfer you to their facility. So they'll let you go off the outside out of the criminal detention, but now you're in immigration detention. The first stop is 2035 North Central Avenue, Phoenix, Arizona. That location is the Phoenix field office for ICE. It's located right between McDowell and Thomas. There, it's just a facility where they process them, but they will likely end up in Florence at the SPC facility. That is also a processing center, but the difference between the Phoenix one and the Florence one is in Florence, they have beds. So it's a process that can take a little longer. In Florence, they're determining a couple things. They're determining to see if you are an individual that is to be deported immediately, or if you're an individual that's going to be fighting his or her case. If you're intending to fight the case, they're likely looking for a place to move you to. They might keep you at SPC, or they may move you across the street to a different Florence facility, Eloy, or out of state. Now, if the person detained is a female, it is very likely that they're going to end up in Eloy because that's currently the only detention center that houses women. So, what happens once you're detained and you want to fight your case? There's actually a series of hearings to establish that. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you're able to get out of detention center and fight your case out in Phoenix. They all ends with an individual hearing, which is the equivalent of a trial. The most common defenses are a cancellation of removal. People that qualify for that are people that have been in the United States for at least 10 years. They have a US citizen or resident parent, spouse, or a child that's underage. That they will suffer extreme and unusual good moral character, and they have good moral character. So that extreme and unusual is that hardship to that US citizen or resident family member. A lot of people say, well, okay, that sounds like something I can win. You know, I'm the main provider for my family. They're going to suffer extreme hardship financially. Well, the arguments now or that the judge and the ICE attorneys push back on is, well, yes, but in all deportations, the family suffers financially. In all deportations, the family suffers emotionally or with depression or anxiety. So they're looking for what makes your case unusual. That's often why the cases that typically do win are ones where there's medical hardship. You may have heard through your connections, "Oh, I heard that there's a way that I can get my documents because my child has autism or has a medical issue." I oftentimes have to tell my potential clients is, you're right, there is a process. It's called cancellation and removal. But in order to even apply for it, you have to be in removal proceedings. It isn't something that you can just apply. You have to be actively in the process of getting deported. And no one wants to jeopardize that possibility. The other one is asylum, as we mentioned, and the third one is an adjustment of status, which is when I was talking about being able to fix your status within the United States when you had that legal entry. Those are the three most common defenses for stopping a deportation. At the same time that this is happening, and if you're detained, you can ask for a bond hearing. So a bond hearing is to see if you can get out of detention and fight your case out in Phoenix instead of being detained. In order to win that, you have to prove that you're not a danger to the community, that you're not a flight risk, and that you're not a risk to national security. So there have been some changes in 2 months. I know it feels like longer, but it's only been 2 months literally today. One of the things that is most common is an expedited removal. So back before this administration, expedited removal was a process that if Border Patrol caught you within 100 miles of the border, they could just deport you right there and then. Now, this administration is expanding expedited removal to apply across the country, and they're applying it to anybody who's been here less than 2 years. So if this affects you or someone that you know, our recommendation is this they try to have something in their phone or some sort of proof that they've been here longer than 2 years. And they don't try to argue that they've only been here less than 2 years and deport them immediately. Remember, if this is a family member or a friend uh, that finds himself in the situation, we want an opportunity to fight their case in front of a judge. If they can't prove that they've been here more than 2 years, they are likely to be just removed immediately. So it's good to have some sort of proof that you've been here longer than that. There was also a law that was signed called the Lincoln Riley Law Act. What it says is that before, in order to be mandatory detention, you typically had to have been convicted of certain crimes. Now, mandatory detention applies to even being arrested. So if you've been arrested for theft or any type of theft charge or have caused serious physical harm, you're not even eligible to apply for a bond, which means that if you are detained by ICE, based on one of these reasons, or you have one of these in your history, even if you're not convicted, it was just an arrest, you will not qualify for a bond anymore, and you would have to fight your immigration case detained. As I mentioned before, there's the Remain in Mexico policy. Um, the victim relief also does no longer prevents detention. So remember when I was talking about U visas and how it's a great process? It is, but in and of itself, it will not stop from you being detained and being placed in removal proceedings. TPS is temporary protected status. That is programs that were initiated to different countries because either they were fleeing a national catastrophe, environmental catastrophe, or a downfall in their country. Well, this administration is ending that program, which means that those individuals that had work permits under this program no longer will have them. Um, if it feels like it's very overwhelming, it is intentional. They call it the scattershot approach, and this is an attempt by the current administration, and they've admitted to it. Is we're gonna flood the zone with different policies, so anyone that wants to be against those policies has limited resources to be able to argue them in court, and frankly, will just be tired. So, if you know an immigration attorney, give them a hug. It's been kind of rough last 2 months, but challenges are being done every day. Lawsuits are being filed. Judges are beginning to rule against the administration, and we've seen um, they're not too happy about that either. But I do foresee that these are challenges and arguments and battles that we're going to only continue to see instead of diminishing. He wants to also end birthright citizenship. So, what is birthright citizenship? It basically means that if you were born within the country, you are automatically a U.S. citizen, regardless if your parents were documented or undocumented. A lot of individuals have been asking me, "Oh my God, my parents were undocumented or are undocumented. Am I going to lose my citizenship?" Currently, the way that they want to phrase this is that it would only affect moving forward, not back. So if you're a current U.S. citizen and you were born in the United States, at least the way the current iterations are, you are not at risk. Um, that being said, it is something that is being challenged in the Trump administration, and although it's been put on hold, the Trump administration has already asked the Supreme Court to listen to arguments. DACA. Currently, initial applications are paused. It's being argued in courts. Technically, with a hearing that happened out in January, it might open the door for initial DACA applications, which would be music to my ears. However, there hasn't been any additional guidance currently. Basically, if you have DACA, you can continue to renew. However, we don't know how much longer DACA will be a valid program. It is being challenged in the courts. And this administration has been very vocal about ending DACA. They have mentioned wanting to create a pathway, like a legal pathway for dreamers to get their green cards and then eventually their citizenship. Honestly, if they were to do something like that, I would welcome it. However, we're not sure if that's actually what will come to fruition or not. And something that you may have heard over the last week, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. So this is a law passed by Congress, as you can see, in 1798, and it's only been used 2 times, and it's only been used in wartime. If you have grown up in the United States or taken any history classes, you may have heard of Japanese internment camps that happened here in the United States, where they were detaining Japanese nationals or even children, U.S. citizen children that had family members that were Japanese nationals. The Alien Enemies Act basically says if me as the executive branch deem that you are a terrorist or you are creating acts of war against the United States or your country's creating acts of war against the United States, I can deport you without even giving you the opportunity to listen to your case in front of a judge. So this happened recently with a lot of Venezuelans. But instead of, because Venezuela currently doesn't take its citizens from the United States, the United States made the decision to send them to El Salvador, to one of the prisons there. Now, what's making this kind of a pivotal issue is while they were trying to fly and in the air, a judge issued an injunction, basically saying if the planes are in there right now, they need to turn back. You cannot deport these individuals yet. We need to listen and give them the opportunity to have their day in court. Um, it doesn't seem that the administration adhered to that. So that's why you may be hearing a lot of news about the Alien and Enemies Act. Um, Also, the people that were deported, the basis is that they're members of the Tren de Agua, which is a gang organization out of Venezuela. The news reporters have asked, okay, what kind of investigations did you do on these individuals to determine that they were gang members? The administration says that they do deep research, but some family members have come out already saying they just had a tattoo, and they are arguing that that tattoo is part of the gang. One of them is actually a very famous Venezuelan soccer player who had a Real Madrid tattoo on his chest, and they're making the argument that he's a gang member. So we will see. My advice: bring that panic down. I know that there's a lot of things going on right now, but right now let's try to get informed. So the best way to bring the panic down is just to be prepared. Los Abogados is working on an accordion file that we want to give out to individuals across the state. I've actually already ordered some, but I hope to be able to buy more. This would include biographical information that they can fill out, as well as emergency contacts. It would have information on all your rights. It's a place for them to be able to put their legal documents like birth certificates, marriage licenses, divorce decrees. A G28 sign, that's a form that they could just sign, and any attorney, if they were detained, could use it to ask for information, powers of attorneys, proof of how long they've been in the United States, and any criminal and immigration history. Some resources that you can use, and I think I shared one of them for this presentation, but I'll be able to give to these to as follow-ups. The first one is to locate an individual that's been picked up by ICE. It's the locator.ice.gov. If they are currently in immigration court and they have an A number, that's the website that you could use. The last three, or the last two, are for criminal history. If they got picked up, that's a way that you can see what kind of criminal history they have. And then lastly, there are Know Your Rights cards that you can pass out to any context that you know that may need it. And those are through the ILRC. Les dicen las tarjetas rojas, and it's cool because they just allow you to print them. You can also order them in bulk. And then I just provided a QR code for the Los Abogados Association. If you're interested in contributing or donating in order for us to be able to make more of these folders and to pass them out, please feel free to scan this QR code and be able to, we will be able to provide more resources to our membership, not our membership, but to the general public. Thank you. And I think we can open it now to some questions and answers.
I
I
did
did
want to
want to
let
let
you
you
all
all
know,
know,
because
because
this
this
is
is
some of the
some of the
questions and
questions and
answers can
answers
be
can be
sensitive.
sensitive.
We
We
are
are
gonna
gonna
stop.
stop recording to allow you the opportunity to ask the questions more freely, as well as I would ask to not specify specific individuals that you are referring to. Just to protect you, I'd be more than happy to provide free consultations through Nunez Law Firm, where we can speak more in depth. But let's speak of things as in hypotheticals, because regardless, I won't be able to give official legal advice without consulting with you one on one. Thank you. And let's stop sharing. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sal. That was super valuable information. We do have a question from Christina Mercado Gonzalez. Is this process for immigrants from all countries? If an immigrant is for, say, Africa, from Africa, for example, do they get stuck in Mexico using the consular process, or how does that work?
No, so
It's similar. Consular processing is something that does occur all over the world. However, instead of going to Juarez for their processing, they would go to their local embassy or consulate in their home country. So they would still do the process of the I-130. If they need a waiver, they would need to file for the waiver, and then they would schedule their appointment to be able to hopefully get their green card.
Excellent. Any other questions for Sal?
And if
you
you
would
would
like
like
a
a
more
more
personalized
personalized
consultation,
consultation,
or you
or you
think
think
there
there
are
are
situations
situations
that
that may that you may need an immigration attorney for, you could just contact the office. It's really simple. It's literally 602, the number 5, and nothing but zeros. So 602 5 and nothing but zeros. Okay. Other
questions?
questions?
I think you left everyone in awe, Sal. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to process, but once we, are able to
I think
edit,
Kayla.
yeah, we can send the video out. We'll make that public and shareable.
I
think
think
Kayla
Kayla
Yes.
Fonseca has a
Kayla.
question.
Let's get you unmuted.
Oh, thank you. Hello, thank you, Sal, for that wonderful information. Okay, now I'm unmuted.
Try now.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
See if we can get
Hello,
some
sorry, can you
assistance
guys hear
here.
me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, great. My question to you, Sal, thank you again for the info that you provided. My question to you is for families in school districts. Is there any advice that you would give to those, whether it's the
I still
parents that are
can't hear
undocumented?
you. It's showing unmuted on my end.
Can you guys hear me now? No? Okay, looks like yes.
Are you able to
possibly.
throw your question in the chat, Kayla, and then we can ask?
Yeah.
Oh, I
Looks
can't
like
hear
they
Kayla.
can hear me.
Okay.
But Sal, could you hear me?
Okay. Can you speak again, Kayla?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you again for the information that you provided. My question to you is, for families in school districts, for example, that have fear, whether it's the parents or the children who their status is either DACA undocumented, specifically undocumented, what kind of advice would you give them just to maintain either safe or plan of action? Because I know right now there's a lot of fear, especially in schools and parents dropping off their kids and yeah.
Yeah, well, under this administration, we're not writing anything out of the table. We think everything is a possibility. However, the approach to schools is similar to the approach that I would give to any business owner. If ICE decides to show up to your place of employment or they decide to go to a school, in order to be able to access the actual students or to access employees, they need to have authority by the business owner to do so. The only way that they can overcome that authority from the business owner is by having a warrant. Now, um, one second. Is there a plug? Now, if the they show up with a document, I need you guys to be very, very careful. There is an administrative arrest warrant that maybe the supervisor for ICE signed and gave to them. That is not an active warrant. That is not a judicial warrant. The only active warrants would be one from a judge. So when you see that form, if they happen to have one, they would need to write. You would need to see the word honorable and then a signature, or magistrate and a signature, or judge and a signature. If it doesn't have that, it's not a real warrant. Um, Yes, it's not a real warrant, and you are not obligated to let them in. That being said, you can be very. What my recommendation is to be polite. You can let them know, hey, we are more than happy to work with you. Unfortunately, our policy in our job or in our office or in our school is that the only people that can access it are employees or students. I'd love to give you access. Can you please come back with a warrant? And we'll be more than happy to work with you. That's why it's very important. Let's say you operate a restaurant. Obviously, the kitchen typically isn't accessible to customers. So if ICE decides to come to your place of establishment and they're trying to enter your kitchen, whoever is in charge of the restaurant at the time can say, you're not able to enter in the back unless they have a warrant. That's also why it's very important that employees, like Michelle was mentioning, don't panic. They advise not to run because that creates probable cause for them to be able to enter that back part without the warrant. As far as the school is concerned, um, I've seen a lot of schools are now advised of what I just mentioned. I don't think that they run a risk of sending their kids to school. I also wouldn't want their kids to lose out on the opportunity to go to school. I know that these are very scary times, but I think especially for children, we need to try to maintain calm and the trying to create a situation where it feels like things are ordinary.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions. Are people are people required to show proof of citizenship in emergency rooms or healthcare providers? Can they be refused services legally?
Um, by law, um, the hospitals are obligated to treat anyone and everyone in an emergency situation. So, let's say someone that doesn't have status needs to go to the hospital, they will be treated, regardless of their immigration status. The administration has said that they will try to use, don't know, they are now able to access locations like that, but I haven't heard of ICE going to a hospital yet. And I think that's because it's very difficult to keep track of that information, especially when there's laws protecting privacy concerns, such as HIPAA laws. So I don't think that they would run as much of a risk going to a health provider if this individual needed it.
And Servando is asking a follow-up question. Would that also apply to places of worship?
Yes. So that is the same time that they mentioned that they were able to access schools, hospitals, and places of worship. Their argument was that if they're chasing an individual and they run inside a church, they should be able to capture this individual regardless. That typically isn't the case, and it's been more of a common courtesy that places of worship are to be respected. That being said, again, at least as of current, I haven't heard of any case across the country where ICE has entered a place of worship. I think they are very cautious of doing that currently because any situation where they see ICE rounding up individuals in front of children or ICE rounding up individuals that are receiving medical care or running into a place of worship, I think that looks badly in terms of publicity. And I think right now there are trying to focus more on a perception of these individuals are gang members, even if they're not.
Excellent, excellent. Any other questions for Sal? You have a few more moments. If not, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Sal, for this valuable information. We do plan on doing a follow-up. Again, as we know, information is changing daily. So we want to be able to provide this and in the near future, provide it in Spanish. We have one more question that we're taking from Eric McIntosh. What rights do green card holders have?
Okay. A green card holder is defined as a lawful permanent resident. So a lawful permanent resident, it's exactly what it sounds like. You are allowed to live in the United States permanently. Um, that doesn't mean that you are not still defined as an alien based on immigration law. That is why a lawful permanent resident can still be detained by ICE, can still be detained in a facility, can lose their residency. Now, as long as I can remember, lawful permanent residents have been able to travel outside the country and come back without any issues. unless they had severe criminal histories. Um, but now we're starting to see a little bit more questions and assumptions. What is this an individual that has opinions that run contrary to the current administration? Is this an individual that maybe does have some criminal history and you don't want to risk it anymore? Is this an individual who there's such a thing as a conditional resident? That is typically an individual who gets a green card through a spouse, and the marriage is less than 2 years old. For these individuals, after 2 years, they have to apply to remove those conditions and then become a lawful permanent resident. So if you're an individual who has conditional residency, it's still a green card, but it's only valid for 2 years, and you haven't applied to remove those conditions, or maybe it's still pending. If you are outside the country and that gets denied while you are outside, you will not be let back into the country. So, although by law and definition, a lawful permanent resident should be able to travel the world and come back, most immigration attorneys currently are advising not to do an international trip unless you really have to for the near future.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again, Attorney Sal Macias, for this valuable information. I hope everyone attending today feels more equipped with information that they can share with the community. Again, we will share Michelle Gray's information along with Sal's for you in our follow-up email, so be on the lookout for that in the coming days. Thank you once again for joining us for Immigration 101 webinar today. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You had a good turnout.
Hmm?